Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my September wrap up. So September was the month of Bookoplathon, which was my readathon that is based on my TBR game Becca's Bookopoly. I really enjoyed hosting that readathon. I also really enjoyed participating in it. I had a pretty ambitious TBR and I can confirm that I will not be taking a punishment for October because I have managed to start the final book on my TBR even though I haven't finished it, which is The Way of Kings Part 2 by Brandon Sanderson. I am currently 32 pages into this. However, I'm filming this on the last day of September and by the end of the day I aim to be on at least page 100. So I do hope that you guys enjoyed participating in Bookoplathon as well. I know there are a whole ton of people who read a lot, like seriously, there's people who read more than double, triple what I managed to read in this month. And in terms of reading months, I think September for me was my third or fourth best reading month of the year. So not amazing, but definitely higher than average for me. I did read 9 books in total and I have already posted a mid-month wrap up. So if you guys would like to see reviews for any of these 5 books, which is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, When Life Gives You Mangoes by Karine Getton, Angel After the Fall Volume 1, Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb, or Just Like You by Nick Hornby, then I will put a link to my mid-month wrap up here. But this video is going to be my reading statistics for September and reviews for the last 4 books I read in the month. So for my September reading statistics, I did read a total of 3,899 pages, which breaks down to an average of 129 pages per day. For the star ratings, I read 2 3-star books, 5 4-star books, and 2 5-star books, which breaks down to an average of exactly 4 stars per book. So as you can see, quality wise, all of the books that I read in September were up there as well. I'm actually really happy with that, and that will contribute to why I read more, because pretty much everything I read I really liked. For the demographics, I hit every single one this month. I read 1 middle grade, 1 young adult, 1 new adult, and 6 adult books. Really happy that I read a lot of adults in September as well, because strangely for me, across the year, I seem to have been reading a lot of YA. For the formats of the books, I read 4 standardly formatted novels, 2 ebooks, 2 arcs, and 1 comic. For the genres, we had 5 fantasy, 2 contemporary, 1 paranormal, and 1 horror. And for the places where I sourced these books from, 4 of them are books that I have hauled in 2020. 3 of them were sent to me by the publisher. 1 of them was from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2020, and 1 of them was from NetGalley. So getting into the reviews, the first book that I read in the second half of the month was My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. Now, I have read a couple of horror books before, but it is definitely not my genre, and it's not a genre that I'm incredibly attracted to. However, there is just something about Grady Hendrix's concepts that really draw me to him. This is the first book I've read by him, and I will definitely be reading more. So for the star rating, I did give this one 4 stars. It is an adult horror story that is pretty much explained by the title. This book follows a group of mostly privileged girls. There is one in there who is not rich like the rest of them, but she does run with the popular crowd. One day during summer at one of the girls' lake houses, they all decide that they would like to trip on acid. However, while the acid trip is not successful, one of them does end up becoming possessed. So I really enjoyed this book. This book is set in the 80s and I definitely love that setting. The 80s is my favorite decade. I really love the music of the 80s. I love the fashion. I love the big hair. I didn't live through the 80s, sadly. I was born in the early 90s, but man do I wish that I did, because it seems like a wild time. I really enjoyed Grady Hendrix's writing in here. I did find it to be incredibly atmospheric and well placed in the setting. I also really enjoyed the personality and the dynamics of this friendship group. There was a lot of the bitchy backstabbing that you can kind of imagine in this high school setting of teenage popular girls, but I do feel like that really added to the atmosphere of this story and once again the setting. My least favorite part of this, surprisingly, was the actual exorcism, just because it was kind of repetitive and quite like the movie The Exorcist. I did really like the girl who was possessed and the way that she was behaving, because I'm not incredibly familiar with horror. I kept thinking throughout this, like, is she possessed or is she just being a bitch? Obviously she is possessed because it's a horror, but because I'm not used to the aspects of things like possession in books always being actually supernatural, I did keep thinking that maybe it was all just a trick. But just the way that she was possessed and the things that she was doing, I really enjoyed, because a lot of it was psychological. Like, she was being a bitch, she was being a bully, and I really liked how that also fit into this high school setting of incredibly bitchy people. One thing that I did not expect from this book is that I nearly teared up at the end. Now, I can't tell you why, but there was just, was it the last chapter or the last couple of pages? It was the last like page and a half of this book. I don't know what it is, but it got me in the feels, and I'm definitely not an emotional reader at all. I rarely ever cry in books, but I very nearly teared up at the end of this, and considering it's a horror, definitely was not expecting that. Now, as this is a horror, there are quite a few trigger warnings in here, as with the majority of horror. I'm not going to go into depth with them because I just would generally say if you are triggered by elements in books, then to thoroughly look into any horror book that you want to read before you go into it. But I would say that the most disturbing and harrowing elements of this book for me were the elements of anorexia and animal abuse in here, so do be very careful if you plan on reading this. The second book that I finished in the second half of the month, I've only just realized I only finished this like a week ago, so wow, the last week I've been doing pretty well, but that was Twisted Fate by Jessie Elliott. Now, this is a book that was sent to me by the author Jessie Elliott to review for you guys, as it is a contemporary fantasy romance book that centers on fae. So this is a new adult book, and we follow a girl called Aurora who is going into her last year of college. Now, as she is beginning her last year, she does go to a party with a couple of her friends where she is kidnapped by the dark fae. They all very quickly realize that Aurora is not the person that they meant to kidnap, so they do let her go on the condition that she will help them find the person they actually are looking for and let them know when she does. Now, that synopsis, which is the initial setup for the book, does resolve really quickly in the first 3 or 4 chapters, and the majority of the fantasy plotline in this book is about a war between 2 factions of the fae, which are the light fae and the dark fae, and the ones that kidnapped Aurora are the good guys in this situation, I guess. They are the dark fae, and the main love interest is the leader of the dark fae. Now, what I've said there about the love interest may lead you guys to believe that this is like a dark romance, or that this guy is like dark fae in terms of people like Desmond Flynn, Rhysand and Collith from Fortuna Sworn. That is not the case. This guy is a successful businessman, and he runs this like swanky hotel. I'm not sure if he runs a chain of them, but he definitely owns at least one. And the correlation to him being dark fae is not the darkness in the traditional sense. It is that sometime in the history of this world, the fae signed a treaty. The light fae would have the daytime and the dark fae would have the night. So just clearing that up, because I don't want you guys to go into this thinking it's going to be like a dark Desmond Flynn, Rhysand like romance, because it's definitely not. So I did give this one 3 stars. I enjoyed the romantic elements and the smut in here when we did get into that. My only real issue with this book, but it is a pretty big one, is that the plot lines and everything just resolved really quickly. Like, that whole kidnapping thing happens in 3 or 4 chapters, and it's only like 10-20% of the book. Because of this, I didn't particularly believe in the romance as it was setting up, because the love interest is attracted to the main character. However, she dislikes him because, completely understandably, he did kidnap her, and just the kind of resentment that she has for him based on that one fact, considering it was like a day and he let her go and he was like, look, I'm sorry, didn't mean to kidnap you. If you could help me find the person I was supposed to kidnap, that would be great. And just the grudge that she holds, and how she's like, I'm attracted to you, but you did this one thing and you're a bit arrogant and I'm just not gonna go there. It just seemed to resolve really quickly, and I did kind of find that throughout the entire book. Like, nothing really left a lasting impression with me because of how fast it was moving. That being said, it was a good quick read. Like, I did enjoy this book. There is also a content warning in here as well for terminal illness. The third book that I finished was The Way of Kings Part 1 by Brandon Sanderson. I kind of don't really want to go too in depth with my review on this in this video, just because in the UK, the Stormlight Archive books, when you buy them in paperback, are split into 2 separate ones. So while I have finished this and marked this as read on Goodreads, this is only half a book, so it's not really fair to judge or review it as though it is a complete story with an arc, because it absolutely 100% isn't. But this is the first half of the first book in the Stormlight Archive, which is one of the series in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. So as I have only read one half plus 32 pages of the first book, and just with the way that this is written, I can't really give you a clear synopsis of what this book is about, so I'm definitely going to be revisiting this entire thing in my October TBR. But this is multi-perspective, and from what I can gather, all of the character perspectives that we follow in here, aside from a couple that aren't super relevant right now, are all kind of hovering around the edges of one half of this big conflict in the world. So this has like 3 false starts to it, and from the first chapter you kind of jump forward in time several times until we get to the actual bulk of the story. But the main conflict in here is that there is a war between 2 peoples called the Alethi and the Parshendi. Now this war was triggered by the Parshendi initiating the assassination of the Alethi king, and so the Alethi decided to go to war with the Parshendi to get revenge. However, at the point that the bulk of this story is told, it has been so long since they went to war that the war is kind of pointless. Like, they've lost their original goal and they're just fighting somewhere called the Shattered Plains, which is this series of plateaus, to capture the most gem hearts and also to gain possession of shards. Now shards you can have in 2 forms. You can have shard plates or you can have shard blades, and if you possess either the plate or the shard, but ideally both, this makes you pretty much invincible. So the majority of the perspectives, as I mentioned, are on the outskirts of this, so everybody has their own kind of personal agenda as well, but everything does tie into this massive conflict. So first off, this is unlike anything I've ever read from Brandon Sanderson. It is definitely his most epic and most dense fantasy. One thing that I've noticed about Brandon Sanderson in the past is that his books and his writing are extremely accessible to people who are not familiar with adult epic fantasy, because he kind of holds your hand as he introduces you to the world, and he will really explain the magic system. A lot of people do consider it info dumping, but with how complex his worlds and his magic systems are, it's actually really helpful and gives you a clear picture of the majority of what is going on before you get into the book. And then he hits you with all of these epic plot twists where you didn't even realize you had gaps in your knowledge. However, with this, he just does not explain anything at all. I have read this, which is 600 pages, and there are so many elements of this world that I literally just have no clue about, because he tells you absolutely nothing. A perfect example of this, which is like probably one of the lesser ones, but one that I can just think of off the top of my head, is that the Parshendi have orange blood, which, as it is never mentioned that people in this world kind of have different colored blood, Parshendi people having orange blood is a little bit strange, but he does not tell you why. He tells you it's orange and then he just moves the fuck on. So pretty much that is the reason why I don't really want to go into depth reviewing this, because at this point I do not have a clear picture of anything that is going on in this book. All I can tell you is that I really enjoyed it. Despite it being very different, I still enjoyed Brandon Sanderson's writing. Towards the end of this, he started introducing things that, if you were paying attention at the beginning, kind of tied to things that he's already mentioned, and things start to become a little bit clearer. This book also straight off has a lot more of Hoyd in it. If you are familiar with the Cosmere at all as a whole, then you will know who Hoyd is. He is a character who makes a cameo in every single one of Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere series. So learning more about Hoyd and why and how he's actually hopping between all of these worlds is really interesting to me, but this is incredibly slow because the full book is over 1,000 pages, so you do kind of expect a slow start, but it is super slow, because on top of the slowness, it's also incredibly dense, and just the way this book is formatted, the text is tiny and there's hardly any margin space, so it is a little bit of a slog. But I have been told multiple times that the second part does pick up and it is definitely worth it. Like, I have faith in Brandon Sanderson that it is going to be worth it in the end, but just reading this first half of the book was a little bit exhausting. That being said, gave it 4 stars. I enjoyed it, and like I said, I have faith that it's going to pull through. So then the final book that I read in the month of September was The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea by Maggie Takuda Hall. This was an arc that was sent to me by Walker Books, so thank you so much to Walker for sending this my way. This was released in the US a few months ago. I believe it was in May, and in the UK the release date for this was early September, so I am very slightly late on reviewing this for you guys. But this is a very queer young adult fantasy where we follow a pirate who was born Flora and who is now Florian. Now Florian is on this pirate ship called the Dove, which kind of masquerades as a passenger ship, so they take on rich passengers from port saying that they're going to transport them somewhere, somewhere, and then it gets so far into their journey, they reveal themselves to be pirates, take all of the passengers as slaves, then take them and all of their expensive possessions to be sold elsewhere. So this story starts off on one particular voyage of the Dove, where a highborn lady called Evelyn has been brought onto the ship to be transported to an arranged marriage that she does not want. Florian and Evelyn do start to grow closer during the course of this journey, and together they hatch a plan to release a captured mermaid, because in this world mermaid blood is coveted because it kind of gives you wild hallucinations and makes you forget things, so it's pretty much a very potent drug. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. I really loved the writing style. I'm very eager to read more from Maggie Takuda Hall in the future. I believe she's written a couple of things before, but I do think that this is her debut full novel, or her debut young adult novel at least. But I would definitely be interested in reading more from her, because I found her writing to be incredibly beautiful and incredibly atmospheric. Throughout the main bulk of this story, you have almost poetical interludes from the sea, where the sea is recounting the kind of just what the sea does and what the sea knows and what mermaids mean to the sea, which I found especially beautiful. And I think that the way the story was constructed with all of these elements and the way it was told gave it a very old-timey tale feel. Now I do keep saying that, but I really don't know how to describe it, because it's not fairy tale-esque. I didn't feel like I was reading a fairy tale when I was reading this, but maybe an old tale of the sea or a folk tale or something like that. It very much gave me the feeling of reading a story that has been read many times before, and it does feel like a book that would be good to read aloud. However, that was also this book's downfall for me, because I did not feel particularly attached to the characters while I was reading it. Like, I felt like I was reading a book as opposed to being like immersed in a story. So that would be the reason why I gave it 4 stars and not 5. I absolutely loved the representation in here. We have heaps of LGBTQIA+ rep with a particular focus on gender identity. There is also racial diversity in here, and it does also touch on themes of colonialism and imperialism. It is actually quite surprising that I enjoyed this book as a standalone young adult fantasy. 1, because I don't typically like standalone fantasy, and 2, because it has a very soft magic system. The magic system in here is pretty much like, if you believe something to be true, you can make it true, as opposed to, I don't know, it being more logical or technical. But I just think that that really added to the atmosphere of this being, I don't want to say it's whimsical, because it is definitely quite dark in places, but just this really magical, beautiful story. As I just mentioned, this is a little bit darker than I expected it to be, so there are a couple of content warnings in here, especially for sexual assault, homophobia, slavery and torture, so do be careful of that if you are going into this. But there we have it. Those are all of my reviews for the books that I read in the second half of September. I had a really great reading month. I'm hoping that I can continue with this energy in October, because I've accidentally made my October TBR just slightly bigger than my September TBR, even though I totally intended to have a little bit of a chill or chiller month in October, but it sadly hasn't worked out that way. So down in my comments, please let me know how your September went. If you participated in the Bookoplathon, I hope you had a great time, and also please let me know how much you read for Bookoplathon. Did you manage to complete your TBR? Because there's tons of people who like went way over their TBR and started rolling extra rolls, so I do hope that you all had a wonderful time. But aside from that, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.